They built empires, shaped nations, and became the richest families in America. But behind their fortunes lies a world of crime, corruption, and hidden power, stories they never wanted you to know. From drug trafficking and war profiteering to monopolies built on blood money, the true masterminds behind America's wealth didn't break the rules. They wrote them. This is the secret history of how the richest families stole their way to the top, and how they've been getting away with it for generations. Stay till the end, because once you see what they've hidden, you'll never look at wealth the same way again. During his incarceration, Allen reportedly made multiple confessions regarding the murders. In recorded prison phone calls to his wife, he allegedly stated, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." Additionally, a prison psychologist testified that Allen had confessed to her on several occasions, providing details consistent with the crime scene. Despite these admissions, Allen's defense argued that his mental state, exacerbated by prolonged solitary confinement, rendered his confessions unreliable. In November 2024, after a lengthy trial, Allen was found guilty on all counts and subsequently sentenced to 130 years in prison. The Rockefellers, oil, power, and hidden crimes. The Rockefeller name is often associated with immense wealth, philanthropy, and the shaping of modern America. However, the rise of the Rockefeller dynasty was built on far more than business acumen and charitable deeds. Behind the polished image of one of the richest families in history lies a story of ruthless ambition, manipulation, and hidden crimes that helped shape the landscape of American capitalism. John D. Rockefeller, the patriarch of the family, founded Standard Oil in 1870, a company that would go on to monopolize the oil industry and amass unprecedented wealth. What began as a small oil refinery in Cleveland quickly evolved into a colossal empire thanks to Rockefeller's cutthroat business tactics. He strategically bought out competitors, manipulated transportation costs through secret deals with railroad companies, and used intimidation to force smaller businesses to sell or be crushed. His methods were often hidden behind layers of legality, but their intent was clear: to dominate the market by any means necessary. One of the most notorious tactics employed by Rockefeller was the use of secret rebates with railroads. He struck clandestine agreements with major rail companies, allowing Standard Oil to transport its oil at significantly lower rates than its competitors. This gave Standard Oil an unbeatable advantage, driving rivals out of business and solidifying its grip on the industry. The rebates were not only unethical, but also illegal under antitrust laws that would later emerge. But at the time, Rockefeller operated in the shadows, protected by his wealth and connections. As Standard Oil's dominance grew, so did its influence over the American political system. Rockefeller understood the importance of controlling lawmakers and regulators, and he spent vast sums lobbying for favorable legislation while suppressing efforts to regulate monopolies. He formed alliances with politicians, funded campaigns, and even bribed officials to ensure that laws would never impede his empire's growth. The company's immense power created a system where Standard Oil could act with near impunity, bending the rules to suit its needs, while the public remained largely unaware of the corruption taking place behind closed doors. Despite his philanthropic image, John D. Rockefeller's charitable donations were often seen as a calculated strategy to cleanse his reputation rather than an act of genuine altruism. His massive contributions to education, science, and religion helped create the perception of a benevolent tycoon, but many critics saw these gestures as a smokescreen for the darker side of his empire. The public backlash against Standard Oil's monopolistic practices reached its peak in the early 20th century, with investigative journalists like Ida Tarbell exposing the company's corruption in a groundbreaking series of articles titled The History of the Standard Oil Company. Tarbell's work detailed the company's predatory tactics and the human cost of its rise to power, sparking public outrage and leading to a wave of antitrust sentiment across the country. The pressure culminated in a landmark Supreme Court case in 1911, where Standard Oil was ordered to be broken up into 34 smaller companies under the Sherman Antitrust Act. However, even this supposed defeat was little more than a technical setback for the Rockefeller family. The breakup only served to multiply the family's wealth, as they maintained large stakes in each of the newly formed companies, including giants like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. Far from dismantling the Rockefeller empire, the legal ruling simply diversified their holdings and cemented their influence across the American economy. Beyond the business world, rumors of darker crimes have swirled around the Rockefellers for decades. Allegations of orchestrating political coups, profiting from wars, and financing secretive global organizations have fueled countless conspiracy theories. While many of these claims remain unproven, the sheer scale of the family's wealth and their deep connections to the political and financial elite have made them a prime target for speculation. The Rockefeller Foundation, one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the world, has been accused of using its vast resources to influence global health policies and population control initiatives under the guise of humanitarian work. The family's involvement in the creation of institutions like the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations has only added to the belief that their influence extends far beyond business and into the realm of global governance. Despite the passage of time, the Rockefeller name continues to carry an air of mystery and controversy. The family's wealth and power have endured for over a century, quietly shaping the world from behind closed doors. Their story serves as a stark reminder that the most powerful figures in society often operate beyond the reach of the law, hiding their crimes beneath layers of respectability and philanthropy. The Rockefellers may have built a legacy of giving, but the foundation of that legacy is rooted in ruthless ambition, corruption, and the unchecked pursuit of power. The DuPonts, chemical fortune built on corruption. The DuPont family is one of America's oldest and wealthiest dynasties, but behind their fortune lies a dark history of corruption, exploitation, and ruthless business practices. The family's rise began in 1802 when Eleuthère DuPont founded a gunpowder manufacturing company along the Brandywine Creek in Delaware. What started as a small explosives business would grow into one of the largest and most powerful chemical empires in the world. From the very beginning, the DuPont family built their fortune by profiting from war. During the War of 1812, the company became the primary supplier of gunpowder to the U.S. government, a relationship that would continue through nearly every American conflict for the next century. The DuPonts amassed enormous wealth by supplying explosives for both world wars, often leveraging their political connections to secure lucrative government contracts. While the public viewed them as patriotic industrialists, behind the scenes, the family was accused of price-fixing, monopolistic practices, and profiting from human suffering. By the early 20th century, DuPont had expanded far beyond explosives, becoming a dominant force in the chemical industry. The company's innovations in synthetic materials like nylon, Teflon, and Freon transformed everyday life. But these breakthroughs came at a cost. DuPont's factories were notorious for polluting the environment and exposing workers to hazardous chemicals without proper protections. One of the company's most infamous scandals involved the toxic chemical C8, used in the production of Teflon. For decades, DuPont knowingly dumped C8 into local water supplies in West Virginia, poisoning thousands of residents and causing widespread health problems. Internal documents later revealed that company executives were aware of the chemical's dangers as early as the 1960s, but chose to cover up the risks rather than halt production. The scandal only came to light after a lengthy legal battle, resulting in massive lawsuits and exposing the company's callous disregard for public health. The DuPont family's influence extended far beyond the chemical industry, reaching deep into the American political system. The family cultivated close relationships with lawmakers, funded political campaigns, and used their wealth to shape legislation in their favor. During the early 20th century, they played a key role in dismantling labor unions, using private security forces to violently suppress striking workers. The family also had deep ties to the eugenics movement, funding research into selective breeding and population control through various foundations. One of the most controversial chapters in the DuPont legacy came during World War II, when the company was accused of war profiteering. DuPont secured massive government contracts to produce explosives, but investigations revealed that the company had deliberately slowed production to increase profits. The scandal led to widespread outrage, with critics accusing the family of putting greed above the needs of the nation. Despite the public backlash, the DuPonts escaped any serious consequences, thanks to their deep political connections and the passage of time. The DuPont family's power wasn't limited to business and politics. They also built an insular and secretive social world with a long history of intermarriage to preserve their wealth. For generations, the family practiced cousin marriages to keep their fortune within the bloodline, a practice that led to widespread rumors of mental illness and genetic disorders among their descendants. This obsession with protecting their legacy extended to brutal family feuds, lawsuits, and even allegations of murder. One of the most sensational scandals occurred in 1996 when John DuPont, one of the family's heirs, shot and killed Olympic wrestler Dave Schultz on his Pennsylvania estate. The bizarre crime shocked the nation and exposed the dark undercurrents running through the family. John DuPont's erratic behavior and long history of mental illness were well known, but his wealth and influence had shielded him from accountability for years. The DuPont family's philanthropic efforts have long been used to mask their darker legacy. They have donated millions to universities, museums, and environmental causes, but many see these acts as calculated attempts to whitewash their reputation. The family's immense wealth and influence have allowed them to shape history from behind the scenes, leaving a trail of environmental destruction, political corruption, and human suffering in their wake. Even today, the DuPont name remains one of the most powerful in American business, with the family's descendants quietly controlling vast fortunes and holding influential positions in corporations and government institutions. The DuPont story serves as a stark reminder of how wealth and power can insulate the elite from accountability. Their rise to prominence was built not on innovation and hard work alone, but on a ruthless willingness to exploit workers, manipulate laws, and place profits above human lives. While the family's contributions to science and industry are undeniable, their legacy is forever tainted by the hidden crimes that made their fortune possible. The Astors, Opium Empire, and Gilded Age Secrets. The Astor family became one of America's wealthiest and most influential dynasties, but their fortune was built on a foundation of exploitation, addiction, and hidden crimes. The family's rise began with John Jacob Astor, a German immigrant who arrived in the United States in the late 18th century with little money but an insatiable appetite for wealth. While the Astors are often remembered for their lavish lifestyle and high society status during the Gilded Age, the origins of their fortune trace back to far more sinister beginnings. John Jacob Astor made his first fortune through the fur trade, but his true wealth came from his involvement in the global opium trade, a dark secret that the family carefully buried beneath layers of respectability. In the early 19th century, Astor became one of the first American businessmen to profit from the Chinese opium trade, supplying vast quantities of the highly addictive drug to China through his American Fur Company. At the time, the opium trade was technically legal, but its devastating impact on Chinese society was undeniable. Millions of people became addicted, fueling a public health crisis that would ultimately lead to the Opium Wars. Astor's role in the trade was largely hidden from public view, allowing him to quietly amass a fortune while others bore the consequences of addiction and misery. Once he had made enough money from opium, Astor abruptly exited the trade, reinvesting his profits into New York City real estate, a move that would secure his family's wealth for generations. The timing was no coincidence. By shifting his empire to land and property, Astor distanced himself from the criminal underworld that had made him rich, rewriting his legacy as a visionary investor rather than a drug trafficker. His shrewd real estate investments transformed him into the largest landowner in New York City, with much of the city's most valuable property falling under Astor control. While the family projected an image of refined elegance, behind the gilded facade lay a ruthless commitment to wealth preservation. The Astors were notorious for their brutal treatment of tenants, charging exorbitant rents for squalid living conditions in their sprawling tenement buildings. Their vast real estate empire made them some of the most powerful landlords in the city, and they used their influence to manipulate laws and suppress tenant rights for decades. As their wealth grew, so did their influence over New York's political and social landscape. The Astors became fixtures of high society, hosting lavish parties and establishing the family's matriarch, Caroline Astor, as the undisputed queen of New York's social elite. However, their carefully crafted public image was little more than a smokescreen for the corruption and exploitation that had built their empire. The family's close ties to city officials allowed them to evade taxes, bend zoning laws, and crush labor movements, ensuring that their fortune remained untouched by the growing social unrest of the era. While the Astors were celebrated for their philanthropy, donating large sums to hospitals, libraries, and cultural institutions, many saw their generosity as a calculated attempt to cleanse their reputation. The family's charitable giving paled in comparison to the vast sums they extracted from the city's working class through their predatory business practices. Even their most famous philanthropic gesture, the donation that founded the New York Public Library, was widely viewed as an effort to whitewash the darker aspects of their wealth. Behind the glittering veneer of the Gilded Age, the Astors remained deeply entwined with the criminal underworld. The family was rumored to have maintained connections with corrupt politicians, gangsters, and secret societies, using their influence to control the flow of money and power through the city. Whispered stories of bribery, blackmail, and political manipulation followed the family for generations, though few ever dared to speak out against them publicly. The Astor legacy was further stained by a series of bitter family feuds, lawsuits, and scandals that exposed the greed and dysfunction at the heart of the dynasty. Infighting over inheritances and power consumed the family for decades, with various branches battling for control of the family fortune. As the Gilded Age faded, the Astors' influence began to wane, but their wealth endured, quietly passed down through generations of heirs who remained hidden from the public eye. Despite their fall from prominence, the Astor family remains a symbol of the dark undercurrents that run beneath America's wealthiest dynasties. Their fortune was built not on innovation or hard work, but on the suffering of others, whether through the opium trade, slum exploitation, or political corruption. The carefully curated image of high society elegance masks a legacy of addiction, greed, and power that has left a lasting scar on the fabric of American history. While the Astors are often remembered as symbols of the American dream, their true story reveals how the wealthiest families have always operated in the shadows, bending the rules and hiding their crimes behind a facade of respectability. The Mellons, banking scandals, and political puppeteering. The Mellon family built one of the greatest fortunes in American history, but behind their legacy of banking, philanthropy, and political influence lies a hidden world of corruption, exploitation, and secret power plays. The family's rise began with Thomas Mellon, a Scottish immigrant who founded the Mellon Bank in Pittsburgh in 1869. However, it was his sons, Andrew Mellon and Richard Mellon, who would transform the family into one of the wealthiest and most powerful dynasties in America. The Mellons' fortune was built through banking, oil, steel, and aluminum, industries that defined the rise of industrial America. But beneath their public image as conservative businessmen lay a ruthless ambition that blurred the lines between business, politics, and crime. Andrew Mellon, the most famous member of the family, was not just a banker. He was a kingmaker who quietly pulled the strings of American politics for decades. As the Secretary of the Treasury under 3 presidents from 1921 to 1932, Mellon became one of the most powerful unelected figures in American history. While publicly advocating for small government and tax cuts, Mellon used his position to enrich himself and his family's businesses. He masterminded sweeping tax policies that slashed rates for the wealthy while protecting his own fortune from scrutiny. At the same time, he steered lucrative government contracts toward companies controlled by the Mellon family, including Gulf Oil, Alcoa, and Koppers. Mellon's influence reached deep into the American political system, with many accusing him of effectively running the country from behind the scenes. His tenure as Treasury Secretary coincided with the Roaring Twenties, a period of massive economic growth fueled by speculation and deregulation, policies that Mellon himself championed. But when the stock market crashed in 1929, millions of ordinary Americans were left destitute while the Mellon family's wealth remained largely untouched. Rumors swirled that Mellon had manipulated financial markets, deliberately allowing the crash to consolidate power and eliminate competition. One of the darkest chapters in the Mellon family's history involved the creation of Alcoa, the aluminum giant that became one of the most powerful and controversial corporations in the world. The Mellons turned Alcoa into a virtual monopoly, controlling nearly all aluminum production in the United States. But the company's dominance was built on corruption, price fixing, and brutal anti-labor tactics. Alcoa was repeatedly investigated for violating antitrust laws, but thanks to the Mellon family's political influence, the company avoided serious consequences for decades. The Mellons' empire also profited heavily from war. During both World Wars, Alcoa secured lucrative government contracts to supply aluminum for military production. However, declassified documents later revealed that Alcoa had been secretly colluding with German companies like IG Farben, one of the key suppliers to the Nazi regime, both before and during World War II. The scandal, which implicated Alcoa in deliberately restricting aluminum production to drive up prices, was quietly buried by the government to avoid a public outcry. The Mellon family's power extended far beyond business and politics. They were key players in shaping American culture and scientific research through their vast network of philanthropic foundations. The Mellon Institute, founded in 1913, became one of the most influential scientific research institutions in the country, but many of its projects were tied to the Mellon family's business interests. Research into chemicals, aluminum, and synthetic materials often directly benefited the family's corporations while presenting a facade of public service. The Mellon Foundation became one of the largest charitable organizations in the world, donating billions to art, education, and medical research. However, many saw the family's philanthropy as little more than a smokescreen to distract from their business practices. The Mellon Institute itself was accused of conducting biased research to protect corporate interests, particularly in the areas of asbestos and environmental pollution. The family's connections to shadowy political organizations have only added to the air of secrecy surrounding their legacy. The Mellons were heavily involved in the founding of the Council on Foreign Relations, a powerful think tank that has been accused of quietly shaping American foreign policy for the benefit of corporate interests. They also maintained close ties to the DuPont family and other powerful industrial dynasties, forming a secretive network of wealth and influence that operated far beyond the reach of the public eye. Despite their immense power, the Mellon family has always operated with an eerie sense of invisibility. They avoided the flamboyant public personas of other wealthy families, preferring to pull the strings from the shadows. While their name is etched onto countless buildings, museums, and universities, the true extent of their influence remains deliberately obscured. The family's long-standing tradition of secrecy has fueled countless conspiracy theories, with many believing that the Mellons have played a key role in orchestrating events from behind the scenes for more than a century. The Mellon story is a testament to how wealth can silently manipulate entire nations without ever stepping into the spotlight. Their legacy is not simply one of business success, but of quiet domination, using banks, corporations, and political puppets to bend the system in their favor while hiding their crimes beneath layers of philanthropy and respectability. The family's fortune endures to this day, its true origins buried beneath carefully curated public images and generations of silence. The Mellons may not be household names like the Rockefellers or the Vanderbilts, but their influence has shaped the course of American history in ways that most will never know. The Vanderbilts, railroad monopoly, and ruthless tactics. The Vanderbilt family became one of America's wealthiest and most powerful dynasties, but their rise to fortune was built on ruthless business tactics, corruption, and monopolistic control. The family's legacy began with Cornelius Vanderbilt, a self-made tycoon who started out ferrying passengers across New York Harbor before expanding into shipping and railroads. Known as the Commodore, Cornelius built an empire through a combination of strategic brilliance, cutthroat aggression, and an unwavering pursuit of wealth. Though he was often praised for his business acumen, his methods left behind a trail of ruined competitors, political corruption, and exploitation. The foundation of the Vanderbilt fortune was laid in the early 19th century through the shipping industry, but it was the family's domination of America's railroads that truly cemented their place among the nation's elite. Cornelius Vanderbilt ruthlessly consolidated control over key rail lines by manipulating stock prices, bribing politicians, and waging brutal price wars that forced smaller companies into bankruptcy. His aggressive tactics earned him a reputation as one of the most feared and hated businessmen of his time. Vanderbilt had no qualms about using intimidation, legal loopholes, and outright deception to gain an edge over his rivals, creating what would become one of the first true monopolies in American history. By the 1870s, the Vanderbilt Empire controlled the New York Central Railroad, the single most important rail network in the country, linking New York to Chicago and controlling the flow of goods across the industrial heartland of America. This stranglehold on transportation gave the family unprecedented power, allowing them to dictate prices, manipulate markets, and crush any competition that dared to challenge them. The Vanderbilt monopoly not only shaped the American economy, but also played a key role in fueling the extreme wealth inequality of the Gilded Age. While the Vanderbilts lived in opulence, ordinary people struggled to afford skyrocketing shipping rates and suffered from poor working conditions under the railroad's iron grip. One of Cornelius Vanderbilt's most notorious strategies was stock manipulation, using insider information to inflate or crash stock prices at will. He would secretly buy up shares of rival companies, then launch smear campaigns or legal battles to drive their stock prices down, only to swoop in and buy them out at bargain rates. These tactics made him one of the richest men in the world, but left countless investors ruined in the process. The Commodore's legacy of ruthless capitalism was passed down to his son, William Henry Vanderbilt, who inherited the empire and doubled the family fortune. Under William's leadership, the family continued to expand its railroad monopoly while crushing labor unions and bribing government officials to avoid regulation. When confronted about his business practices, William infamously declared, "The public be damned," a phrase that would come to symbolize the Vanderbilts' cold indifference to the suffering their empire caused. Despite their staggering wealth, The Vanderbilt family was notorious for their hostility toward organized labor. Strikes and worker uprisings were brutally suppressed, often with the help of hired security forces and political allies. The family leveraged their immense influence to block early labor laws and ensure that the railroads operated with minimal oversight. The Vanderbilts' control over the transportation system made them essential to the American economy, giving them a stranglehold not only on industry, but also on the political system. The family's corruption ran deep, with numerous allegations of bribery and backroom deals used to secure favorable legislation. They routinely paid off politicians, judges, and regulators to maintain their dominance, making a mockery of the democratic process. Their close ties to Tammany Hall, New York's notoriously corrupt political machine, allowed the Vanderbilts to operate above the law, shielding their empire from scrutiny for decades. While the family amassed a staggering fortune, the Vanderbilts made little effort to conceal their greed or arrogance. They became infamous for their extravagant spending, building opulent mansions like the Breakers in Newport and the Vanderbilt Mansion in New York, monuments to excess at a time when much of the country lived in poverty. The family's obsession with wealth and status led to bitter rivalries between different branches of the dynasty, with heirs squandering millions in a relentless quest for social dominance. The Vanderbilts' influence began to wane in the early 20th century as new antitrust laws and shifting economic tides broke up the family's monopolies. However, the damage they inflicted on the American economy endured. The railroads they built laid the foundation for modern corporate power structures, while their ruthless business tactics set the blueprint for generations of robber barons to come. Despite their fall from prominence, the Vanderbilts managed to protect much of their fortune through strategic philanthropy. They donated millions to universities, libraries, and cultural institutions, carefully crafting a public image of benevolence while quietly preserving their wealth. Yet even their charitable efforts were often tainted by self-interest, with many donations tied to tax breaks and efforts to rehabilitate the family's tarnished reputation. The Vanderbilt legacy remains a testament to how power and wealth can be amassed through corruption, manipulation, and the exploitation of others. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that the American dream has always had a dark underbelly, one where the richest families rise not through hard work and innovation, but through ruthless ambition and hidden crimes. The Vanderbilt name may evoke images of luxury and grandeur, but beneath the gilded surface lies a dynasty built on greed, exploitation, and the quiet manipulation of power.